I'm transforming everything in Minecraft to make the ultimate survival map. The demand for me to continue this mega survival map has been a bit mental. So that's exactly what we're going to do today. Now, because we're transforming 10 entire biomes and every in-game structure, we've got a lot to tackle. So in this episode, and most likely every ongoing part from now, we're going to be taking on 2 biomes per video. And if you want to see me transform the rest of the island, then you're going to have to get this video to 100,000 likes. But give me a bit of time. These builds take weeks to produce. Also, if you have any questions or need any information regarding the world, then join the Discord and check out the FAQ, as this is where your questions are going to get answered. A project of this size is going to cost a small fee on my Patreon, but in doing so, you get access to every build I've ever done just for $5. And then once you've done that, you can even cancel the subscription so you don't get charged again, if you wish to do so. I mentioned this in the first episode, but just to put things into perspective, the sheer scale of this map is ridiculous. The island itself is made up of 16 million blocks, and not only are we transforming 10 entire biomes, but also every naturally spawning vanilla structure you can think of. Plus, I'm even adding some of my own custom builds. There's going to be custom loot, treasure hunts, stories, and loads of secrets that I won't even show you guys. And I'm building everything by myself. So subscribe today and keep up to date with the project and be the first to download it once it's available. In the previous part, we finished the episode by transforming the Plains biome, including all of the structures that come with it. So, the plan for this episode is to tackle the desert, which includes the pyramid, a village, the desert well, and some custom builds to spice things up a little bit. Then, we've got to transform the shipwrecks on the island beaches. And finally, the mushroom and swamp island that sits below the Plains biome. This means tackling the witch hut, lots of mushrooms, and connecting the 2 islands. And of course, there's going to be some snippets of backstory, but I will leave a lot of surprises for when you play the map for yourselves. The first naturally spawning structures we're going to start with are the desert village buildings. First things first, I slowly deconstruct the vanilla village by moving each of the buildings, as I wasn't happy with the original layout. With a nice blank canvas, I begin by creating the village centre and place the desert well directly in the middle of the strip, seeing as this will be the village's main source of water. I create water channels either side with multiple small bridges connecting each side, and build a custom palm tree that will line the main street. If you couldn't tell, I'm using Gerudo Town from Breath of the Wild as one of my references for this village. With the main strip complete, I start repositioning the buildings neatly either side of the path, prioritizing the larger ones and the profession buildings. I'll add in the remaining buildings and decorations once I've tackled the village center. Our first profession building of the village is none other than the shepherd. If you're wondering why I'm only doing a handful of profession-based buildings for each village, it's because I want this to feel as close to the original as possible. A normal vanilla village only has a few different professions, so searching through several villages to find a specific villager profession is quite normal. I've hand-picked specific villager professions for each biome in this map to fit their respective themes. This way, when you play it, it will require you to travel to different biomes to seek out the other villager professions and make for a more interesting playthrough. That, or you can just craft the specific profession blocks and make a trading farm. Moving on from our shepherd building, we're onto the stonemason. Now, you may notice a similar styling for each of these buildings, especially with these cubic, almost turret-like houses. I tried my best to match these buildings to the surrounding environment, meaning they're predominantly made up of lighter materials found in the environment to beat off that scorching desert sun, and at the same time provide plenty of shade to each of these market stalls with colourful draped cloth. With our stonemason complete, it's time to move on to the village library. I styled this similar to a mosque, however, I end up coming back and tweaking it slightly, as I didn't want to take away from my transformation of the vanilla church, which is coming up. The best part about building this survival project is that I get to challenge myself by building in a theme that I would never have previously tried, while really trying to keep each build survival friendly, with complete interiors in every single building. Now, moving on to the toolsmith. I was struggling to find ways to differentiate each of these buildings and have them stand out from one another. So, for this profession-based building, I was sure to add plenty of furnaces used to forge and create a variety of tools for the villagers to use. Before moving on to the main feature of this town, I wanted to repurpose these tall, yet rather thin tower buildings into a main entrance, almost as a guard tower building. Then, once complete, mirroring the finished design to the other side with the main path sandwiched between the two. Then, for the remainder of these large buildings to fill up the main square, I whip up this house design, matching the styling from previous buildings we've created, and add plenty of colourful draped cloth. I then reuse and paste this building around, making small tweaks each time and changing the coloured drapes. Our main street is almost complete, so to finish it off and fill this large open space at the back of the town, I build a grand mosque to house the cleric. Now, please bear in mind that this is my own take on this style of building. It is in no way meant to be an accurate representation of a real mosque. I simply wanted to create an alternative place of worship other than a default village church. A lot of you have been asking for me to mix in some different styles, and I felt that this fit perfectly with the theme and surrounding environment, having taken much inspiration from Egypt. Obviously, I wanted to do this building some justice, especially as I haven't built anything like this before. So, I used the Mosque of Muhammad Ali as a guideline. Let me know down below what places of worship you'd like to see in other biomes. Oh, also, seeing as both the jungle and desert biomes are connected to the ocean, I figured that both villages would trade with one another, and perhaps ship over materials for building. So, I incorporated some jungle wood, which fits the colour palette of the sandstone and terracotta really well. Finally, with our main profession buildings complete, we're left with a bunch of very small, cube-like buildings to transform and scatter throughout the town. These custom houses are still very simple in design, and are pretty much still just square buildings. However, as I'm limited by the size of these houses, I make sure to add plenty of small details and features to really make these simple house designs pop. I settle on 3 small house designs and start pasting them throughout the city, mostly adding them behind the main street buildings, but much less uniform. By sprawling the town outwards like this, it really helps make things seem busier than they actually are. To finish these buildings off, I change the coloured drapes to add further variation. Now, moving on to the decorations, I transform the pile of scattered hay, adding it to the back of a wagon, and house the bell in sandstone. I then add the wagons throughout the town and place the bell at the end of the main street. And for a final touch, I upgrade the almighty desert well. Down on the ground, the village looks even busier, with market stalls cluttering the main street, greenery clinging to the village buildings, and apparently all the villagers want to go for a swim. So, let's move on, shall we? Moving on to one of the main vanilla structures in Minecraft, the Desert Temple. First things first, I basically quadruple the size of it because we need something massive to stand out in the desert. The entrance of the original Desert Temple looks somewhat like a face, so I thought a massive skull would work perfectly to replicate this on a much more grand scale. Plus, it's very intimidating. Centuries ago, this is where the evil pharaoh who ruled this region stored his most precious possessions. There may just be a whole story about that and how it went wrong. Now, I won't lie, this skull is from an old build where I transformed an amplified world, but I couldn't pass up on the opportunity of reusing it here, although I did have to make a lot of tweaks. Firstly, I adjust and reattach the lower jaw as I wanted to open the skull's mouth to act as the entrance. Then I go around making general adjustments as something just felt a little bit off about the design and I couldn't wrap my head around what it might be. Eventually, I noticed that the cranium was too large and looked disproportionate. I also made adjustments to the upper jaw and once fixed, positioned it up against the side of the pyramid with a much more animated and realistic result. I build up a large wall of pillars and connect them up to the jawline of the skull. To finish up the entrance, I ignite the skull's eye sockets and create a staircase leading inside. The other main feature of the Vanilla Temple's design are these 2 large towers that sit on the front 2 corners of the pyramid. I etch into the sandstone with orange terracotta and red sandstone accents we used on the previous wall and played around with varying supports. Then I detailed the center with the Eye of Ra. Ancient Egyptians associated it with the destructive power of the sun. They also used this symbol to protect buildings and themselves. So it seemed only appropriate to use it to decorate the pharaoh's temple. On the second level of the tower, I build a statue based on my take on an ancient Egyptian Magi. The Magi were an elite force used to protect valuable areas, so they're a perfect addition to our paranoid pharaoh's temple. I add crenellations and build a snake symbol on the other side, as this was used to symbolize royalty in ancient Egypt. You may recognize some of these patterns and designs as they featured on my original Desert Temple transformation build. However, I used them sparingly, as I didn't want there to be too much going on. I say that as I'm literally adding a giant fire brazier to finish the tower, so there's definitely some irony there. To complete the exterior of the pyramid, I split the main body of the pyramid up into 3 sections, lining it with this small wall, creating walkways on each level. I then place the fire braziers on each corner and mirror the entire design all the way around. Then I add this triangular shape protruding from the side of the pyramid, which acts as a side entrance. I then embed that orange accent colour to finish the design. With the pyramid transformed, I reposition it into the desert and blend the sand dunes into the design. Before we move on, however, I've got to transform the interior. I wanted to go for a very clean interior, to match that of the vanilla pyramid. So I flattened off the walls and built large pillars to support an upper balcony. I then continued to add more large pillar supports, add some fire braziers and lava channels, and decorate the floor with an exaggerated version of the original design. Our menacing pyramid is complete, and beneath lies the pharaoh's tomb filled with treasure and secrets. Just be sure you don't miss a step, as it's rigged with booby traps. Before moving on from the desert biome, I wanted to include a few custom builds, starting with the ruins. Now, as I mentioned, in this fantasy land, this particular region was previously ruled by an evil pharaoh, who hoarded his riches in his temple and exploited the people he ruled over. The desert people were scared of his cruelty, so they sent secret messages to the tribes in the jungle with their trade ships. The pharaoh discovered these messages and went into a fit of rage. In his anger, he summoned a giant wither to wreak havoc on the people who he believed had betrayed him. The wither turned on the pharaoh before destroying the ancient village and leaving it in ruins. As you can see, many of the people fled to other regions before returning to their homeland years later to start again, gradually establishing themselves in the nearby village. These ruins are a reminder of the destruction caused by the last known person to summon a wither, perhaps until one day an epic Minecraft gamer like you will take on the challenge. Just remember guys, everything that I create is an escape from reality, and nothing is supposed to be accurate to any single history, religion or culture. Another feature I wanted to add to spice the desert up was an oasis or two. So I dig out an area and build several palm trees at varying heights. I paste them in clusters and decorate the ground surrounding it with plenty of greenery, include a bunch of tropical fish and a few turtle eggs as well. Stumbling across these on your adventures could be a real lifesaver. You better just hope that it's not a mirage. Moving away from the desert and towards the beaches, it's time to transform the shipwreck. Now, I hate building boats. It's one of those types of builds that I never look forward to doing, but the end result is always worth it. However, it's been a really long time since I built a proper galleon. So here you can see I started building a very boxy looking ship hull. With lots of time and effort, along with a bunch of tweaks to the shape and proportions, I started to get something that looks a bit better. Because it's been a long time since I've built a large ship, and because I was so rusty, this took much longer than it should have. Eventually, however, the shape started coming together. I built up some placeholder masts to map the layout of the ship and built forward a proper beakhead. It was at this point I realised I'd had a lot of you ask me to include a reference to Pirates of the Caribbean, so I decided to base the main silhouette around the Black Pearl. Once I got my head down, things really started coming together. I built the main deck, added gun ports and start creating a quarterdeck and captain's cabin. I then continue working onto the masts, adding a couple of crow's nests, some details to the hull and the back of the quarterdeck, and finishing up with some tweaks to the rudder and lighting on the main deck. Now, let's not forget that this is a shipwreck, so it's time to make it feel a little bit more like one, starting by rotating it on a slight angle. Now, of course, this leads to a lot of tidying up, since tilting a build like this deforms the shape and some of the blocks even disappear, requiring a lot of manual tweaking. After fixing things up, I start adding in some tattered sails, hanging limply from the masts after being left to rot. Perhaps on the inside, there are some clues about what really happened, or even the first riddle to a huge treasure hunt involving dangerous quests that span across the entire map. But, I have no idea, of course. Anyhow, I place the shipwreck on the beach, embedding it into the ground and building up the sand where the ship has pushed inland and displaced it. Since I placed another vanilla shipwreck on the other beach next to the jungle, I thought I should change things up this time and make this into an actual ship, sailing in to explore the uncharted lands in the jungle. As you can see, I've already made some changes to the colour scheme of the hull. Next, I add the shrouds, which is the rigging that stabilises the masts. Then I get to work on the sails, which took a little bit of time as I made them organic, as though the wind is blowing them at a slight angle. I add in a foresail at the front, before moving on to the sails on the central mast. I mimic the organic look I went for the front sails, before finishing up with the final sails at the back of the ship. Since we're still going for that Black Pearl vibe, I thought it'd only be appropriate if the sails followed suit. I suppose she looks a little less tatty and weather-beaten, but I suppose this was around the time when Captain Jack first obtained the ship, so she's not too battered and bruised yet. Here you can see her in all of her glory, approaching the jungle's beach. Perhaps there's something hidden there. Captain Jack wouldn't be making the journey for nothing after all. You'll also find a rowboat at shore. Let's hope those pirates don't nab whatever they're looking for before you guys get the chance. Now that that's all tied up, it's time to move on to the Mushroom Swamp Island. First and foremost, we've got to connect this to our main island. So I start working on a bridge. I build a boxy, medieval style gatehouse for the end of the bridge that resides in the plains, which sits nicely at the edge of this cliff. For the main bridge, I create a flat walkway, decorated it with intricate patterns and crenellations to match the style of the gatehouse, which I paste over to the other end of the bridge as well. Now that our bridge is starting to take shape, it's time to destroy a segment of it, as this island is not really all that it seems. In fact, there's a good reason why the people of the plains have placed an outpost so close to the edge of their territory. This particular looking island once looked much like the plains, with fields, trees, and quaint little houses. One day, a child from a plains village stumbled across the bridge to the mysterious island, and her curiosity took her across. She spotted a beautiful glowing altar in the center of the village, and immediately went to investigate. She discovered an assortment of crystals, candles, and dried flowers, shrouded in a vibrant green glow. Curious, she picked up one of these crystals and heard a sudden loud shriek from the upper side of the mysterious village. The little girl had inadvertently broken an ancient spell, used by a coven of witches to disguise themselves from the outside world. The girl then made a run for the bridge, as her surroundings began to transform around her. The distant terrain became more menacing, the fields were becoming waterlogged, the trees were transforming into giant mushrooms, and the once quaint houses started to look unusual and creepy. As the girl neared the end of the bridge, the witch who had discovered her sent a spell after her in an attempt to protect the coven's secret. The girl escaped unscathed, but the bridge was badly damaged, as you just saw. Since that day, no one has ventured to the island to see what remains. Some even say there's a mysterious ogre that lives somewhere deep within the swamp. I wonder who that could be. Now that I've got that crazy story off my chest, it's time to create these particular mushrooms to place around the island. As you can see, I'm creating pretty organic designs for these mushrooms, just to maintain that spooky, quirky theme to the story. I really wanted it to feel immersive, like these were naturally occurring toadstools straight out of a bedtime story. And of course, now it's time to upgrade these basic witch huts into something more bizarre and unique, as expressed in the story. I adopt that typical exaggerated roof style that you see in medieval fantasy houses, using crimson wood, nether brick, and some greenery to add a pop of colour to the wacky design. I then quickly whip up an alternate design in the same style, this time on a slightly larger scale with a protruding roof out the front. Finally, we can place down these mysterious little houses and surround them with the wacky toadstools we created before. I also mix in some brown variants of the mushrooms as well, to keep things looking nice and organic. And with that, let's check out what we've built. So we've officially completed the plains, desert, the beaches, although I didn't actually count them as their own biome, and the Mushroom Swamp Island. But I have a question for you. Which biomes should I work on next? Remember, we've got the mesa, savanna, taiga, snowy mountains, dark wood forest, and jungle to go, with some other bits and bobs that I need to transform too. We're making great progress, but be sure to hit that 100,000 like goal. Then I can continue the project and get this on my Patreon as quickly as possible for you guys. If you have any questions about the world, remember to join the Trixie Blocks Discord, which is linked down below. Thank you all so much for the support on this project. It's honestly been a bit overwhelming. I'll be working hard on the next episode to get it out for you soon. Other than that, I'll see you in the next one.